Michael Steele was no stranger to the spotlight. For years, he had been a familiar face on television, known for his sharp tongue, quick wit, and ability to command attention in any room. Whether it was debating hot-button political issues or breaking down complex policies into digestible sound bites, Steele had carved out a reputation as someone who could hold his own against even the toughest opponents. But on this particular day, something felt different, though he couldn't quite put his finger on it. It was a crisp morning when Michael arrived at the studio for what was supposed to be just another routine appearance on a popular political talk show. He greeted the production crew with his usual charm, cracking jokes and shaking hands as he made his way to the green room. As he flipped through his notes, sipping on a cup of coffee, he glanced at the lineup of guests scheduled to appear alongside him. One name caught his eye: Karoline Leavitt, a young journalist who had recently gained attention for her fearless reporting style and knack for asking uncomfortable questions. Steele smirked to himself. "This should be interesting," he muttered, under his breath. He'd seen clips of her work before. She wasn't afraid to ruffle feathers, and that was exactly the kind of energy that made live TV so unpredictable. Still, he wasn't worried. After all, he'd faced tougher crowds than this. What could possibly go wrong? As the clock ticked closer to airtime, the atmosphere in the studio grew electric. The host welcomed the audience, both in the room and tuning in from home, setting the stage for a fiery discussion about immigration reform, a topic that always seemed to ignite passionate debates. The cameras rolled, and the panelists were introduced one by one. When it came time for Karoline to speak, she leaned forward slightly, her piercing gaze locking onto Steele almost immediately. There was an unspoken challenge in her eyes, though. Her tone remained calm and professional. The conversation started innocently enough, with the host guiding the discussion and allowing each guest to share their perspective. Steele jumped in confidently, delivering his trademark mix of humor and insight. He spoke passionately about the need for balanced policies, emphasizing the importance of compassion while also addressing security concerns. It was classic Steele, charismatic, polished, and seemingly unshakable. But then, Karoline chimed in. Her voice was steady, but there was an edge to it, a hint of something brewing beneath the surface. She began by acknowledging Steele's points, but quickly pivoted to ask a question that stopped him in his tracks. "You've talked a lot about supporting comprehensive immigration reform," she said, her words measured but deliberate. "But some critics have raised concerns about comments you've made in the past. Do you think your public statements align with your private views?" The room fell silent for a brief moment. Steele blinked, caught off guard by the directness of her inquiry. He chuckled nervously, brushing it off as if it were nothing more than a harmless jab. "Well, I think my record speaks for itself," he replied smoothly, flashing his trademark grin. But Karoline wasn't letting him off the hook that easily. She pressed further, hinting that she had information that might contradict his carefully crafted narrative. At this point, the tension in the room became palpable. Viewers at home leaned in, sensing that something big was about to happen. Steele shifted in his seat, his confidence wavering ever so slightly. He tried to deflect, using humor to lighten the mood, but Karoline remained focused, her expression unwavering. It was clear she wasn't here to play games, and whatever she had up her sleeve, it was going to change the course of the conversation forever. Little did anyone know, this was only the beginning. What unfolded next would leave jaws dropping, spark heated debates across social media, and turn an ordinary morning talk show into one of the most talked about moments in recent television history. Karoline's next move came faster than anyone anticipated. Without missing a beat, she reached into her folder and pulled out a stack of printed documents. She held them up for the cameras to see, her expression calm but resolute. "These are emails," she explained, her voice cutting through the tension like a knife. "They were sent anonymously to my team, and they appear to show a side of your private conversations that conflicts with what you've said publicly." The studio audience gasped audibly. Even the host seemed momentarily stunned, unsure of how to steer the ship back on course. Steele froze for a split second, his smile faltering as he stared at the papers in Karoline's hand. His mind raced, trying to process what was happening. Was this some kind of setup? A prank? Or worse, was it real? "What are you even talking about?" Steele finally managed to say, his tone laced with irritation. He leaned forward, squinting at the documents as if hoping to make sense of them without actually touching them. "Where did those come from? Who gave them to you?" Karoline didn't flinch. If anything, her composure only grew stronger. "Like I said, they were sent anonymously," she replied coolly. "But I think the real question here isn't where they came from. It's whether or not they reflect your true thoughts on this issue." She paused for effect, letting her words sink in before continuing. "Because if they do, then there's a serious disconnect between what you're saying in public and what you're saying behind closed doors." Steele's face turned red, though whether it was from embarrassment or anger was hard to tell. He shifted uncomfortably in his seat, clearly struggling to find the right response. For someone who prided himself on being quick-witted and unflappable, this was unfamiliar territory. "This is ridiculous," he snapped, waving a hand dismissively. "You can't just throw accusations around based on some random emails. Do you have any idea how irresponsible that is?" But Karoline wasn't backing down. Instead, she pressed further, reading aloud excerpts from the emails. Each sentence hit like a punch to the gut, painting a picture of someone whose private words were far less diplomatic and far more inflammatory than his public persona suggested. The audience listened intently, hanging on every word. Social media erupted almost instantly, with viewers sharing clips of the exchange and weighing in with their opinions. As the segment unfolded, Steele grew increasingly agitated. He tried to interrupt Karoline multiple times, raising his voice and gesturing wildly in an attempt to regain control of the narrative. But the more he protested, the guiltier he seemed. The moderators attempted to step in, reminding both guests that they were on live television and urging them to keep things civil. Yet their pleas fell on deaf ears. Steele was too worked up to listen, and Karoline was laser-focused on making her point. Then came the moment that would define the entire episode. Karoline produced a second piece of evidence, a recorded phone call. "This audio clip," she announced, holding up her phone for emphasis, "is from a conversation you had with a close associate. It sheds even more light on your views regarding immigration reform." Before Steele could object, the recording began to play over the studio speakers. The room went silent. Everyone, even the crew, seemed frozen in place as the disembodied voice filled the air. In the clip, Steele could be heard mocking supporters of immigration reform, using language that was not only dismissive, but also deeply offensive to many. The contrast between his polished public statements and the raw, unfiltered tone of the recording was jarring. When the clip ended, the silence lingered for several seconds. Steele looked pale, his jaw clenched tightly as if trying to hold back a tidal wave of emotions. When he finally spoke, his voice trembled with barely contained fury. "That's completely out of context," he shouted, slamming his fist on the table. "You're twisting my words to fit your agenda." The audience reacted with a mix of shock and disbelief. Some people clapped, siding with Steele and accusing Karoline of playing dirty. Others booed, convinced that the evidence spoke for itself. Meanwhile, the online conversation spiraled out of control, with hashtags related to the incident trending worldwide. What had started as a routine political debate had morphed into a full-blown spectacle, capturing the attention of millions. For Steele, the situation was unraveling faster than he could manage. Every attempt to defend himself only seemed to dig him deeper into trouble. His frustration boiled over, turning into a tirade that left everyone watching, both in the studio and at home, stunned. And Karoline, unfazed by his outburst, continued to press her case, methodically dismantling his arguments one by one. By the time the segment drew to a close, it was clear that something monumental had just occurred. The fallout would reverberate far beyond the confines of the studio, sparking debates, dividing opinions, and leaving a lasting impact on everyone involved. But for now, all eyes remained glued to the screen, waiting to see how the drama would unfold next. The tension in the studio was so thick you could cut it with a knife. Steele's face was flushed, his hands gripping the edge of the table as if trying to steady himself. He looked like a man backed into a corner with no clear way out. Karoline, on the other hand, remained eerily composed, her calm demeanor only adding fuel to the fire. She had thrown down the gauntlet, and now all eyes were on Steele to see how he would respond. "This is garbage," Steele bellowed, his voice rising, to a level that made even the host wince. "Do you have any idea how irresponsible this is? You're taking things out of context, twisting them to make me look bad." His words tumbled out in a chaotic rush, each sentence more heated than the last. He leaned forward, pointing a finger at Karoline, as if accusing her of some grand betrayal. "Whoever sent you these emails, they're fake. This whole thing is a setup." Karoline didn't flinch. If anything, she seemed almost amused by his reaction. "If they're fake," she said coolly, raising an eyebrow, "then why are you so upset? Why not just explain what happened instead of attacking me?" Her tone was measured, but there was a sharpness to it that cut through Steele's rant like a knife. It was the kind of question that demanded an answer, and everyone in the room knew it. Steele opened his mouth to respond, but no words came out. For a moment, he just sat there, his chest heaving as he struggled to regain control of his emotions. Then, without warning, he exploded again. "You're ruining my reputation," he shouted, his voice cracking under the weight of his anger. "I've spent years fighting for policies that actually help people, and now you're dragging my name through the mud over some shady recording and anonymous emails." The audience didn't know what to think. Some were nodding along with Steele, clearly sympathetic to his plight. They whispered among themselves, speculating about whether Karoline had crossed a line. Others, however, weren't buying it. They saw Steele's meltdown as proof that he had something to hide. The split reactions rippled through the room, creating an atmosphere charged with tension and uncertainty. The moderators tried their best to intervene, reminding both guests that they were live on television and urging them to stay focused on the topic. But Steele was too far gone. His frustration had boiled over into full-blown rage, and nothing, not the moderator's pleas, not the stunned looks from the audience, could pull him back. He ranted about bias, conspiracy theories, and the dangers of sensationalism, his sentences becoming increasingly disjointed as he spoke. Meanwhile, Karoline watched him quietly, letting him dig himself deeper into the hole he was creating. Every time he lashed out, she responded with a simple, pointed question or observation. "If you believe the emails are fake," she asked at one point, "why not provide evidence to disprove them?" Her words hung in the air, unanswered, as Steele fumbled for a response. By now, social media was ablaze. Clips of the confrontation were being shared and reshared, accompanied by memes, hot takes, and endless commentary. Supporters of Steele accused Karoline of orchestrating a hit job, while her defenders praised her courage for holding him accountable. Hashtags related to the incident trended worldwide, turning what should have been a routine political discussion into a cultural phenomenon. Back in the studio, the segment was spiraling further out of control. Steele's rant reached a fever pitch when he accused Karoline of having ulterior motives. "You're not here to have a real conversation," he spat, his voice dripping with disdain. "This is about ratings for you, isn't it? You don't care about the truth, you just want to destroy people." Karoline finally broke her silence, her tone firmer than before. "I'm here because transparency matters," she said, her voice steady despite the chaos around her. "People deserve to know the truth even if it makes them uncomfortable. And if you're unwilling to address these allegations honestly, then maybe that says more about you than it does about me." Her words struck a nerve. Steele's face twisted in anger, and for a brief second it looked like he might lose it completely. Instead, he slumped back in his chair, visibly deflated. The fight seemed to drain out of him, leaving behind a man who realized, perhaps too late, that he had let his emotions get the better of him. As the segment limped toward its conclusion, the damage was undeniable. Steele's meltdown had been broadcast live to millions of viewers, cementing itself as one of the most dramatic moments in recent TV history. For Karoline, the fallout was equally significant, but for very different reasons. While Steele faced backlash and scrutiny, she emerged as a symbol of accountability, someone willing to challenge power regardless of the consequences. When the cameras finally cut away, the studio erupted into murmurs and whispers. The audience filed out slowly, still processing what they had just witnessed. Behind the scenes, Steele retreated to the green room, his head bowed as he grappled with the enormity of what had happened. Karoline, meanwhile, remained in the spotlight, fielding questions from reporters eager to hear her thoughts on the explosive exchange. What started as a simple debate had turned into a defining moment for both individuals, and neither of them would ever be the same again. The moment the show ended, the real storm began. Social media exploded like a firework display on New Year's Eve. Clips of Steele's meltdown were everywhere, shared, edited, and turned into memes faster than anyone could keep up. News outlets picked up the story within minutes, dissecting every word, every gesture, and every raised voice from the heated exchange. It wasn't just a political debate anymore. It was a spectacle, a cultural moment that had everyone talking. For Steele, the aftermath was brutal. The backlash came fast and hard. Critics pounced on his behavior, labeling him as hypocritical and out of touch. Headlines blared phrases like "public figure meltdown" and "caught in the act," painting him as someone who couldn't handle accountability. Supporters tried to rally behind him, accusing Karoline and the network of setting him up, but their voices were drowned out by the sheer volume of criticism flooding in. Sponsors and advertisers quickly distanced themselves. Brands that once proudly associated with Steele began pulling their support, fearing the negative association would hurt their image. Invitations to speak at high-profile events dried up almost overnight. Friends and colleagues who had previously praised his charisma and wit suddenly became scarce. Some even went so far as to issue public statements clarifying their positions, ensuring they weren't seen as taking sides in the growing controversy. Steele found himself isolated, grappling with feelings of betrayal and regret. Days after the incident, he released a formal apology, admitting that his private words were inappropriate and taken out of context. He explained that stress and frustration had gotten the better of him during the live segment and promised to do better moving forward. But apologies rarely fix reputations shattered on live TV, and many weren't convinced. Skeptics pointed out that the damage had already been done, and trust, once broken, is incredibly difficult to rebuild. Meanwhile, Karoline's life transformed in ways she hadn't anticipated. Overnight, she became a household name. Her bold move to challenge Steele earned her praise from journalists, activists, and everyday viewers alike. People admired her courage and composure under pressure, hailing her as a symbol of accountability in an age where transparency is often overshadowed by spin. Offers poured in, interview requests, speaking engagements, book deals, all promising to catapult her career to new heights. But fame has its downsides. Alongside the accolades came waves of harassment and threats. Supporters of Steele accused her of orchestrating a smear campaign, questioning her motives and integrity. Some even went as far as targeting her personally, sending hateful messages and spreading rumors about her professional conduct. Despite the negativity, Karoline remained steadfast, refusing to let the backlash deter her. In interviews, she spoke openly about the challenges she faced, acknowledging the toll it took on her mental health while reaffirming her commitment to holding powerful figures accountable. As the dust settled, the broader implications of the incident started to emerge. Political analysts weighed in, debating whether Steele's meltdown represented a larger pattern of hypocrisy among public figures, or if it was simply an isolated lapse in judgment. Others focused on Karoline's role, praising her investigative work, but cautioning against the risks of relying on anonymous sources and leaked materials. The line between exposing truth and sensationalizing conflict blurred, sparking discussions about ethics in journalism and the responsibilities of those in power. For Steele, the fallout served as a humbling wake-up call. He retreated from the spotlight for weeks, reflecting on what had gone wrong and how he could regain the trust he'd lost. In rare interviews, he admitted fault, acknowledging that his private communications didn't align with his public stance. "I messed up," he told one journalist candidly. "I said things I shouldn't have, and I let my emotions get the better of me. That's not who I want to be." Karoline, too, reflected on the experience, though her perspective was vastly different. Speaking to a prominent magazine, she described the whirlwind of attention and the emotional toll it took. "It's overwhelming," she confessed. "One day you're just doing your job, and the next, you're thrust into this massive spotlight. It's exciting, but it's also scary." She emphasized the importance of staying true to her values, vowing to continue challenging authority figures regardless of the consequences. Despite their opposing roles in the drama, both individuals emerged changed by the ordeal. For Steele, it was a lesson in humility and accountability, a reminder that actions, even in private, carry weight. For Karoline, it reinforced her belief in the power of truth-telling, even when it comes at great personal cost. Both became symbols of the complexities of modern discourse, Steele representing the fragility of public personas, and Karoline embodying the relentless pursuit of transparency. In the end, the fallout wasn't just about two people, it was about the culture surrounding them. Viewers, commentators, and critics alike debated the significance of the incident, using it as a lens to examine issues of integrity, authenticity, and the ever-blurring lines between public and private life. And as the world moved on to the next big story, the echoes of that explosive confrontation lingered, serving as a stark reminder of the unpredictable nature of truth, power, and accountability in the digital age. Weeks had passed since the explosive confrontation, but the ripple effects continued to shape both lives in profound ways. For Steele, the aftermath was a whirlwind of introspection and damage control. He spent countless hours replaying the events, in his mind, dissecting every word he'd said or shouted during that fateful segment. It wasn't just the public humiliation that weighed on him. It was the realization that his private words had exposed cracks in his carefully constructed image. In quieter moments, Steele admitted to himself that Karoline's questions weren't entirely unfair. The emails and audio clip didn't lie. They revealed parts of him he wasn't proud of. Sure, they were taken out of context, as he'd claimed repeatedly, but deep down, he knew the core issue ran deeper than semantics. "I got lazy," he confessed during a late-night phone call with a close friend. "I thought I could say one thing publicly and let my guard down privately without consequences. Turns out people notice when you're not being authentic." That sense of regret gnawed at him. Steele had always prided himself on being a straight shooter, a man who spoke truth to power and stood by his convictions. But now, he couldn't shake the feeling that he'd betrayed his own principles. He began reaching out to old allies, apologizing for past missteps and trying to rebuild bridges burned in the heat of the controversy. Some welcomed him back cautiously, while others kept their distance, unwilling to associate themselves with someone still under scrutiny. Publicly, Steele worked tirelessly to repair his reputation. He appeared on smaller shows and podcasts where the atmosphere felt less hostile, using these platforms to address the incident head-on. In one particularly candid interview, he acknowledged the disconnect between his public statements and private conversations. "It's easy to talk about policies in broad strokes," he admitted. "But the reality is I've struggled with finding the right balance. And sometimes, frustration gets the better of me. That doesn't excuse what happened, but it explains why I reacted the way I did." His admissions resonated with some viewers, who appreciated his willingness to own up to his mistakes. Others remained skeptical, convinced that his apologies were too little, too late. Still, Steele pressed on, determined to prove that he was more than the meltdown everyone had seen on TV. He threw himself into community work, attending town halls and engaging directly with constituents to show he hadn't lost touch with the issues that mattered most. For Karoline, life after the incident was equally transformative, but in a very different way. Overnight fame brought opportunities she'd never dreamed of, but it also forced her to navigate uncharted territory. Journalists sought her opinions on everything from media ethics to political accountability. Fans praised her courage, calling her a hero for standing up to someone so powerful. Yet amidst the praise there was also pressure, a constant expectation to live up to the fearless persona the world had created for her. Karoline tried to stay grounded, reminding herself of why she'd pursued journalism in the first place. "This isn't about me," she often told colleagues. "It's about holding people accountable and giving a voice to those who don't have one." Despite the spotlight, she refused to let the attention overshadow her mission. She continued digging into stories, chasing leads, and asking tough questions, just as she always had. But the darker side of fame lingered. Harassment and threats became a daily part of her life, forcing her to take extra precautions whenever she left home. Online trolls dissected her every move, scrutinizing her wardrobe, tone, and even her facial expressions. At times, the negativity felt suffocating. During one particularly rough week, she confided in a mentor, admitting that she sometimes questioned whether the risks outweighed the rewards. "I didn't sign up for this level of hate," she said, her voice tinged with exhaustion. "But then I think about all the people who are counting on me to keep going, and I remind myself why I started this journey." Despite the challenges, Karoline found strength in unexpected places. Messages of support poured in from strangers who thanked her for inspiring them to speak truth to power. Colleagues rallied around her, offering advice and encouragement as she navigated the complexities of her newfound prominence. Slowly but surely, she learned to embrace the good while shielding herself from the bad, focusing on the impact she could make rather than the noise surrounding her. As weeks turned into months, both individuals began to find a new rhythm. Steele's efforts to rebuild trust showed signs of progress, though scars from the incident would likely remain forever. Karoline, meanwhile, embraced her role as a watchdog, determined to continue challenging authority figures regardless of the backlash. Though their paths rarely crossed after that explosive day, the shared experience bonded them in an odd sort of way. Two sides of the same coin, each grappling with the weight of accountability in their own unique way. Looking back, neither could deny how much the incident had changed them. For Steele, it was a humbling reminder of the importance of authenticity and consistency. For Karoline, it reinforced her belief in the power of transparency, even when it came at great personal cost. Both emerged stronger, wiser, and more aware of the delicate dance between public perception and private reality, a lesson that would stay with them long after the headlines faded away. Months after the dust had settled, the world moved on to new scandals, fresh headlines, and bigger controversies. But for those who had watched that explosive confrontation unfold, its impact lingered like a faint scar, subtle but undeniable. It wasn't just about what happened during those heated moments on live TV. It was about the larger questions the incident raised about accountability, integrity, and the increasingly blurred lines between public and private life. For Steele, the journey toward redemption was neither quick nor easy. He learned the hard way that trust is fragile, a delicate thread that can snap in an instant if mishandled. Though he worked tirelessly to rebuild his reputation, he knew some damage couldn't be undone. There would always be skeptics, people quick to dismiss him as someone who talked a good game but failed to walk the walk. But instead of letting bitterness take root, Steele chose to focus on growth. He began speaking openly about the lessons he'd learned, not just from the meltdown, but from years of navigating the complex world of politics and media. In interviews and essays, he emphasized the importance of consistency. "What you say behind closed doors matters just as much as what you say in front of cameras," he reflected during one talk. "People aren't dumb. They notice when your actions don't match your words. And once they lose faith in you, earning it back takes more than apologies. It takes real change." Steele also made a conscious effort to listen more and lecture less. Gone were the days of polished sound bites, designed to impress without challenging. Instead, he engaged with communities directly, sitting down with ordinary people to hear their concerns and frustrations. These conversations weren't always comfortable. They forced him to confront uncomfortable truths about himself and the systems he'd long defended, but they reminded him why he'd entered public service in the first place. Slowly but surely, he started rebuilding bridges, proving through action rather than words that he was committed to doing better. Karoline, too, carried the experience with her, shaping how she approached her work moving forward. Fame brought opportunities, yes, but it also came with responsibility, a weight she felt keenly every time she stepped into the spotlight. She knew not everyone would agree with her methods or support her causes, but that didn't deter her. If anything, it fueled her determination to keep pushing boundaries. In speeches and interviews, Karoline spoke candidly about the challenges she faced as a journalist in the modern era. Holding power accountable isn't easy, she admitted, during a panel discussion. It comes with risks, both personal and professional. But if we shy away from asking tough questions because we're afraid of backlash, then we fail at our job. Transparency matters, even when it's uncomfortable. Her courage inspired others to speak up, sparking conversations about the role of journalism in holding leaders accountable. Young reporters looked to her as a role model, someone who embodied resilience and conviction in the face of adversity. Yet, despite the admiration, Karoline remained humble, often reminding audiences that she was still learning herself. "I'm not perfect," she said in one interview. "No one is. But I believe in the power of truth and I'll keep fighting for it no matter how hard it gets." The incident also prompted broader discussions about ethics in media and politics. Analysts debated whether the use of anonymous sources and leaked materials crossed ethical lines or served as necessary tools for uncovering hidden truths. Some argued that transparency should never come at the expense of fairness, while others insisted that powerful figures must be held to higher standards, even if it meant exposing their flaws. For viewers, the drama served as a mirror, reflecting societal tensions and divisions. It highlighted the growing demand for authenticity in leadership and the consequences of failing to meet that expectation. At the same time, it underscored the complexities of modern discourse, how quickly narratives can shift, how easily emotions can boil over, and how fragile trust truly is. As time passed, both Steele and Karoline found ways to move forward, each carrying the scars and lessons of that unforgettable day. Steele emerged wiser, more grounded, and deeply aware of the need for genuine connection with those he sought to represent. Karoline continued blazing trails, using her platform to challenge norms and amplify voices often ignored by mainstream media. Their paths rarely crossed again, but the shared experience left an indelible mark on both their lives. Ultimately, the story of Steele's meltdown wasn't just about two individuals. It was about all of us. It was a reminder of the fine line between conviction and hypocrisy, courage and recklessness. It challenged viewers to reflect on their own values and biases, encouraging them to think critically about the leaders they admire and the systems they trust. And though the headlines faded, the echoes of that explosive moment remained, quietly shaping conversations about accountability, transparency, and the ever-evolving relationship between power and truth. While the immediate drama of the confrontation had faded, its effects continued to ripple outward, touching lives far beyond those directly involved. What started as a heated exchange on live TV evolved into a cultural moment that sparked conversations in households, workplaces, and online forums across the globe. People didn't just talk about Steele or Karoline, they talked about themselves, their values, and the kind of world they wanted to live in. For many viewers, the incident became a litmus test for how they viewed leadership and accountability. Some saw Steele's meltdown as evidence of hypocrisy, a reminder that public figures often say one thing while believing another. Others sympathized with him, arguing that everyone makes mistakes and deserves a second chance. These differing perspectives highlighted a deeper divide, the tension between holding leaders accountable and recognizing their humanity. On social media, debates raged on for weeks. Memes mocking Steele's outburst shared space with heartfelt posts praising Karoline's courage. Comment sections turned into battlegrounds where strangers clashed over whether the ends justified the means. Was it fair to expose someone based on private communications? Or was it necessary to ensure transparency? These discussions weren't confined to politics. They spilled over into everyday life, prompting people to examine their own relationships and the expectations they placed on others. In schools and universities, professors used the incident as a case study to teach students about ethics, media literacy, and the power dynamics at play in public discourse. This is what happens when private actions meet public scrutiny, one professor explained during a lecture. It forces us to ask tough questions. Who gets to decide what's fair? Where do we draw the line between privacy and accountability? Students eagerly debated these issues, bringing fresh perspectives to age-old dilemmas about integrity and trust. The story also inspired creative expression. Artists created paintings and digital art depicting Steele's meltdown, using bold colors and chaotic brushstrokes to capture the intensity of the moment. Writers penned essays and short stories exploring themes of redemption, truth, and forgiveness. Musicians composed songs inspired by the incident, turning it into a metaphor for broader struggles against dishonesty and corruption. The incident wasn't just news anymore. It had become part of the cultural fabric, woven into the collective consciousness of society. For Steele, this newfound place in the cultural zeitgeist was both humbling and daunting. He couldn't escape the fact that his meltdown had become a symbol of everything wrong with modern politics. The performative speeches, the carefully crafted personas, the disconnect between words and actions. But instead of shying away from it, he embraced the role of cautionary tale. In interviews, he admitted that he'd learned more from failure than he ever had from success. "If my mistake can help someone else avoid making the same one," he said, "then maybe there's some good that comes out of all this." Karoline, meanwhile, found herself at the center of a movement she hadn't intended to start. Her willingness to challenge authority resonated with a generation hungry for authenticity and justice. Young activists cited her as an inspiration, crediting her with giving them the courage to speak up against injustice in their own communities. She received letters from people around the world thanking her for reminding them that even the most powerful figures are not above scrutiny. But Karoline knew better than anyone that being a symbol came with its own challenges. The pressure to live up to people's expectations weighed heavily on her shoulders. Every decision she made, from the stories she pursued to the way she conducted interviews, was scrutinized through the lens of her newfound fame. Critics accused her of chasing headlines rather than substance, while supporters defended her as a beacon of truth in a world drowning in misinformation. Balancing these competing narratives was exhausting, but Karoline refused to let the noise drown out her purpose. As months turned into years, the incident took on a life of its own, becoming a reference point for future scandals. When new controversies erupted, commentators drew parallels to Steele's meltdown, asking whether the individuals involved had learned anything from history repeating itself. It served as a constant reminder that accountability isn't just about exposing wrongdoing. It's about creating a culture where honesty and integrity are valued above spin and self-preservation. Both Steele and Karoline eventually moved on to new chapters in their lives, but neither forgot the lessons of that fateful day. For Steele, it was a wake-up call to prioritize authenticity over image. For Karoline, it was a reaffirmation of why she'd chosen journalism in the first place, to shine a light in dark places and demand answers when silence prevailed. Though their paths rarely crossed again, their shared experience left an indelible mark on their careers and on the world. Looking back, it's clear that the incident was more than just a dramatic moment in television history. It was a catalyst for change, forcing people to confront uncomfortable truths about themselves and the systems they participated in. It challenged viewers to think critically, act responsibly, and hold each other accountable, not out of malice, but out of a shared desire for a better, more transparent future. And so, the echoes of that explosive confrontation continued to reverberate long after the cameras stopped rolling. It reminded us all that moments of crisis, however painful, can also be opportunities for growth, if we're willing to listen, learn, and move forward together. Years passed, and the specifics of that explosive confrontation began to fade from memory. New scandals, new faces, and new controversies took center stage in the ever-spinning cycle of news and entertainment. Yet, for those who had witnessed it firsthand or even secondhand through endless replays, the moment remained etched in their minds like a vivid dream. It wasn't just the drama itself that lingered. It was the way it had forced people to confront uncomfortable truths about power, accountability, and human nature. For Steele, the incident became a defining chapter of his life, a cautionary tale he often referenced when speaking to younger generations entering politics or public service. He'd sit on panels, write op-eds, and give lectures, always circling back to that fateful day. "I made mistakes," he'd say candidly, his voice tinged with both regret and wisdom. "But those mistakes taught me something invaluable. No matter how polished your image is, if it isn't built on honesty, it will crumble under pressure." Steele's transformation was gradual but undeniable. Gone was the slick, carefully curated persona that once dominated TV screens. In its place stood a man who seemed more approachable, more vulnerable. He spoke less about policy and more about principles, about the importance of staying true to yourself even when the cameras are off. His critics still existed, of course, but many softened their stance over time, recognizing the effort he put into rebuilding trust. Some even credited him with setting an example of resilience and growth, a reminder that failure doesn't have to be final. Karoline, too, evolved in ways she hadn't anticipated. Her name became synonymous with fearless journalism, but she resisted letting it define her entirely. Instead, she used her platform to amplify voices beyond her own, to tell stories that might otherwise go unheard. She traveled to remote corners of the world, uncovering injustices and shining a light on communities fighting for change. Her work inspired countless others to pick up pens, microphones, and cameras, determined to make a difference in their own right. Yet despite her success, Karoline never lost sight of the weight of her role. She knew that wielding power, even in the form of a journalist's pen, came with responsibility. "The truth is important," she said during a keynote speech at a journalism conference, "but so is compassion. We can hold people accountable without dehumanizing them. We can demand answers without losing sight of our shared humanity." Her words resonated deeply, particularly among aspiring journalists navigating the challenges of an increasingly polarized media landscape. Many looked to her not just as a trailblazer, but as a guide, a reminder that integrity and empathy could coexist, even in the toughest of circumstances. As the years went by, the incident also found its way into classrooms, documentaries, and books. Academics studied it as a case study in crisis management, dissecting every decision, every reaction, every consequence. Filmmakers turned it into a docuseries, blending archival footage with interviews from key players to explore the broader implications of the confrontation. Writers penned novels inspired by the events, using fiction to delve deeper into the emotional and psychological toll of living under public scrutiny. Even pop culture couldn't resist immortalizing the moment. Comedians referenced it in stand-up routines, actors portrayed it in satirical sketches, and musicians wove its themes into lyrics about truth, betrayal, and redemption. It became part of the collective consciousness, a touchstone for understanding the complexities of modern life. But perhaps the most profound legacy of the incident lay in the quieter, less visible ways it shaped individuals' lives. Ordinary people, those who weren't politicians, journalists, or celebrities, found themselves reflecting on their own actions and choices. Parents used the story to teach their children about the importance of owning up to mistakes. Friends debated ethics over dinner tables, drawing parallels between the incident and their own experiences with honesty and accountability. Strangers, connected online, sharing personal stories of moments when they'd faced similar crossroads. In workplaces, the incident sparked conversations about transparency and leadership. Managers encouraged open dialogue, urging employees to speak up when they saw inconsistencies or injustices. Teams worked harder to foster environments where vulnerability was seen as strength, not weakness. Even corporations, often criticized for prioritizing profit over people, began reevaluating their practices, inspired by the idea that authenticity could build stronger, more lasting relationships. On a societal level, the incident contributed to a shift in how people viewed power and responsibility. It challenged the notion that leaders were infallible heroes, instead framing them as flawed humans capable of growth, if given the chance. At the same time, it reinforced the idea that holding power accountable wasn't just the job of journalists or activists, it was everyone's responsibility. Every citizen, every voter, every consumer played a role in shaping the systems they lived within. Looking back, it's remarkable how one heated exchange on live TV could ripple outward in such profound ways. It wasn't just about Steele or Karoline, it was about all of us. It reminded us that moments of crisis, however painful, can also be opportunities for reflection and growth. It showed us that accountability isn't just about punishment. It's about creating a culture where honesty is valued, where mistakes are met with grace, and where redemption is possible. And so, the echoes of that explosive confrontation continued to reverberate, long after the headlines faded and the cameras stopped rolling. They reminded us that we're all connected, that the choices we make, big or small, have consequences that extend far beyond ourselves. They challenged us to think critically, act responsibly, and strive for a better, more transparent future, not just for ourselves, but for the generations to come. In the end, the story wasn't just about what happened that day. It was about what came after, the lessons learned, the bridges rebuilt, the courage summoned, and the hope that even in our darkest moments, we can find a way forward together.